Out Caesar, out Nolus, Emperor of the world.
Charlie Chaplin was a divinity. He owned the world.
He was the first universal artist that I can think of. Chaplin was probably the most popular person, entertainer, however you want to say, on the planet.
The thing about Chaplin that made me lean toward him was the ambience he gave, the sort of free-floating feeling about someone who could circumvent nature.
My reaction to Great Dictator is so hard to talk about because I was so... I laughed so hard and was so deeply moved.
Here was this huge artist standing up against this gargantuan monster. It was a championship match for the ages.
To me, it was one of the finest films I'd ever seen. When you were faced by the totalitarian regimes and the madness they inflicted on the world, courage isn't enough. You have to be able to laugh in their face, throw back your head and say, "You don't count. I discount you this way. I give you the laugh of all time, the great laugh of acceptance, which melts you down."
A remarkable new discovery in the Chaplin Villa at Vevey, Switzerland. In the film vault are the famous comedies, The Gold Rush, City Lights, which are known to the entire world. What was not known lay in the cellar for decades. 2 suitcases belonging to Sidney Chaplin, Charlie's brother, full of curious little boxes which turned out to contain amateur film. Chaplin shot his film in black and white, but this footage takes us behind the scenes in color. It adds another dimension to an extraordinary story, the confrontation between Adolf Hitler and Charlie Chaplin through the making of a highly controversial motion picture released in 1940 called The Great Dictator. Charlie Chaplin, the little tramp, and Adolf Hitler, the leader of Germany, had more in common than just a moustache. They were born in the same week of the same month of the same year. A few years before Chaplin became famous as the tramp, Hitler was a tramp. Both were outsiders who left their homeland to conquer the world. They became the best loved and most hated men of their time. In every country, Chaplin was the symbol for laughter. Hitler, the symbol for destruction. His war cost 55 million lives. But in the 1930s, he seemed unstoppable. World leaders sought to appease him. Most of Hollywood chose to ignore him. But one voice would speak to millions. One man would have the courage to challenge the world's most dangerous leader, Charlie Chaplin. The climax of The Great Dictator. Chaplin's Jewish barber is mistaken for the dictator and is called upon to speak.
Excellency, the world awaits your word.
Chaplin had never spoken on the screen until he made this film. But he felt if he could talk from his heart, he might even be able to shorten the war. What was it that would bring Chaplin and Hitler into such a unique confrontation? Chaplin was born in 1889 in the South London slums he would recreate so often in his films. His father was a music hall singer, as was his mother. Because of her mental trouble, Charlie and his brother were sent to the workhouse. Working people were terrified of this fate, which Chaplin vividly conveyed in The Kid, when the law comes to take the child to the workhouse. Chaplin escaped into the theatre, became a music hall comedian, and sailed on his first tour to America in 1910. Hitler came from a lower middle-class family at the border of Austria and Germany. He hated school and learned very little, but was always a ringleader. His father was a brutal man, a customs officer who had married one of his servants. Hitler's mother was probably the only woman Hitler ever loved. She protected him from his father. As soon as he could, he went to Vienna, where he hoped to become an artist. The young Hitler refused to do any work other than drawing, but he was considered no better than competent. His failure in the entrance exam for the Vienna Academy devastated him. How different history might have been had Adolf Hitler been accepted. He lost his self-respect and sank lower and lower into the slums of old Vienna. He became a tramp, sleeping rough. This Vienna men's home probably saved his life. It was supported partly by Jewish charities. But from such men as Guido von List, Hitler soaked in hatred of the Jews. List preached the superiority of the Aryan. His symbol would become Hitler's. Munich, 1st of August 1914. A cheering crowd celebrates the outbreak of war. The scene is recorded by a photographer, and among the crowd he's photographing is the 25-year-old Adolf Hitler. It is not often one sees the birth of a legend. This crowd takes no notice of the tramp on his first appearance in public in 1914. A year later, he would be mobbed wherever he went. 2 years later, he would be the most famous man in the world. February 1916, Chaplin signs with the Mutual Film Corporation for the highest salary of any performer in history, standing behind Sidney Chaplin. Hitler was earning 9 marks a week at the front, but he loved the war. It gave him a sense of purpose, and he was still an artist. He designed this facade for a soldier's cinema. Hitler had avoided the Austrian army because of his passion for Germany. His supreme commander, the Kaiser, is fuming with jealousy over Chaplin's popularity in this wartime cartoon. Charlie captured the Kaiser at the end of Shoulder Arms. The Chaplin films did more than any others to raise morale. "20 years later, Chaplin would restage World War I for The Great Dictator, picking up where Shoulder Arms left off, wearing German uniform.
Big Bertha, a cannon that could hurl a projectile 100 miles, was this day to make its first appearance on the Western Front, was this day to strike terror into the hearts of the enemy. 75 miles away was her target, the Cathedral of Notre Dame. And clear! Ready! Fire!
He was the little guy who, they loaded it up and then he had to pull this string that fired it. And he had such a funny way of doing it that watching this, I screamed with laughter and it ruined the take. And he was delighted, my father. I thought he'd be furious. God, that cost me a fortune, and he loved it.
He became a worldwide figure during the First World War, while the German submarines were sinking convoys of ships. Somehow, his films were circulating around the world. It's as if there were special convoys just to take Chaplin films to Europe.
Before stupendous crowds all over the United States, Chaplin took part in Liberty Bond rallies. Many people criticized him for not joining up, but these rallies brought in huge sums for the war effort. He appeared with Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks, with whom he would form United Artists. Here, together with D.W. Griffith, they announced their independence. This gave Chaplin complete artistic freedom. By now, the war was over. A gas attack at the end of 1918 had put Hitler into hospital. While convalescing, he had heard of the defeat of the German army on the Western Front. He felt utterly betrayed. He had no job to go to, so, like so many, he stayed in the army. The revolutions of 1919 and 1920 propelled Hitler into the Nazi Party. 1921, Chaplin returns to London for the first time. The city he knew as a poverty-stricken youth gave him a phenomenal welcome. But for Hitler, in Germany, conditions were appalling. An economic collapse when a loaf of bread cost 1 billion marks created ideal conditions for extremists. Hitler joined his old commander, General Ludendorff, in an attempt to seize power, the Munich Putsch of 1923. It landed him in jail, where he dictated his political ideas into a book. Among the men who inspired him was the Italian fascist dictator Benito Mussolini.
Fascism in the 20s was regarded with a certain admiration. Mussolini seemed to be cleaning out the marshes, suppressing the mafia, getting the trains to run on time. Mussolini particularly impressed businessmen.
The Wall Street crash of 1929 undermined the world's financial markets. Without it, Hitler could never have reached power. It brought chaos back to Germany and convinced many that democracy did not work. Germany was falling into anarchy. Political street fights happened every day. The communists fought the Nazis. Everyone fought the police. People looked for a strong leader. Hitler knew the value of film, but audiences did not respond to him as a silent actor.
I remember seeing a silent newsreel of Hitler and thinking suddenly, this man looks absolutely ridiculous, and just like Chaplin would look if he were playing such a part.
Hitler's fortunes were transformed by sound, launched in America 2 years earlier by a film made, ironically, by Jews about Jews. The talking picture increased his audiences and made them take Hitler seriously.
Und ich glaube nicht, dass die Gegner, die damals noch gelacht haben, heute auch noch lachen.
Er ist eindeutig als Redner an die Macht gekommen. Stück für Stück und immer mehr, und die Begeisterung wurde immer größer. Er hat sich ja immer mehr perfektioniert. Er hat sich ja dann auch sehr bemüht. Er hat ja zum Beispiel auch zwischendurch mal Schauspielunterricht genommen, weil er diese Wirkung verstärken wollte.
Chaplin was even more dependent on gesture. He carried on making silent pictures until he made The Great Dictator, when he played Adenoid Hinkle.
Genau, die Welt stürzt mit zerfällten sagt. Ah, und die Aryan Maiden. Ah, die Aryan Maiden. Die Delikatessen mit der Schön. Und der Flachsen mit der Stresses. Ah, und der Ulstein mit der Muss. Der Muss von der Kinder Katzenjammer. Der Katzenjammer mit der Uten Sekt, der Hinten, Feiten, Hütten, Feiten, Dotten, Hütten Sekt. Hey, soldiers for Hinkle!
Well, he was a marvelous imitator, and he could do almost any language. just by the sound of it. They had a newsreel theater there on Hollywood Boulevard, only newsreels, which my father adored. Instead of seeing some movie that was lousy, we'd go and see an hour and a half or 2 hours of newsreels. And that's where you'd see most of this.
Chaplin considered Hitler one of the greatest actors he had ever seen.
Wenn wir selbst dieses deutsche Volk emporführen durch eigene Arbeit, durch eigenen Fleiß, eigene Entschlossenheit, eigenen Trotz, eigene Beharrlichkeit, dann werden wir wieder emporsteigen, genau wie die Väter einst auch Deutschland nicht geschenkt erhielten, sondern selbst schaffen mussten. Der Schuten. Und das trifft das Sauerkraut mit der Schuten. Und der Leberwurst mit der Schuten. Der Flipsensack dahinter mit der Schuten. Der Flipsensack der Klärten. Das Strängelichen mit der Hultensack der Fläten. Und der Blätzensack der Elten. Besick! Besick! Der Schuten. Der Schuten.
His Excellency has just referred to the Jewish people.
Chaplin would also play a Jewish barber, whose girlfriend in the film and his wife in real life was Paulette Goddard, who was half Jewish.
How'd you do it?
The Nazis were convinced that Chaplin was a Jew. Chaplin never denied it.
No. I absolutely thought he was Jewish. First of all, because of the way I was brought up, everybody funny was Jewish.
On his visit to Berlin in 1931, he was met by rapturous crowds. The Nazis hated seeing a man they thought was a Jew welcomed like this.
Wir wussten, dass ein Jude war, nicht wahr? Das wussten wir. Und das war natürlich für uns nicht das, was wir wollten. Und wir wussten auch, dass er uns nicht lieben konnte und nicht geliebt hat. Und dass er großen Einfluss hatte.
The Nazis would later use these newsreels of Chaplin's visit in their most notorious propaganda film.
Der Jude Chaplin wurde bei seinem Besuch in Berlin von einer begeisterten Menge begrüßt. Es lässt sich nicht leugnen, ein Teil des deutschen Volkes applaudierte damals ahnungslos den zugewanderten Juden, den Todfeinden seiner Rasse.
The Nazis brought out a book called The Jews Are Looking at You, in which Chaplin was described as a disgusting Jewish acrobat. A friend of Chaplin came across a copy in Berlin.
And I thought, well, he ought to have a look at this. And I sent him a copy. Now, in all the years, Charlie often sent me Christmas cards, telegrams, telephone calls. But he only sent me one letter, and it was a short letter thanking for that book. And I always think that it may well have contributed to his resolve to make The Great Dictator.
Mussolini also disapproved of Chaplin and would ban his films. Chaplin visited Venice on his European tour, expecting to meet the dictator. The meeting never happened, but he would be brilliantly parodied a few years later in The Great Dictator.
He's coming, quick, give me a flower. A flower. Remember, at all times you must be above him, before him. Entering or leaving, you must be first.
One of the great moments in The Great Dictator is the casting of Jack Oakey as Mussolini.
I thought the public extremely enthusiastic on your arrival. Sure. They like to see new faces.
Jack Oakey comes out on the balcony and struts and sticks out his chin, and by God, there's Mussolini. So it was a masterful job of casting on the part of Chaplin.
You cannot treat the bacterium people this way! I'll take the bacterium people and I'll tear them apart like that! Look, listen, please! Look, what are you doing? Tell me yourself! It's an insult to the people! Don't keep the best spaghetti! It's spaghetti! He eat a side of the pretty and we have a war! Oh!
But before satirizing the dictators, Chaplin would turn his attention to the problems plaguing America in the 1930s. Strikes, lockouts, unemployment. The Ford factories brought out troops to deal with strikers. Henry Ford supported Hitler and was both anti-Semitic and anti-union